everybody. We're going to kind of keep ourselves moving here on this conversation for the lit review. Good to have you here. How's it going? Scope of work coming together.
Done and off.
Done and
yeah.
edited and reviewed. And of course, Dr. Kerr's group has already gotten theirs back, I understand, from their client. I know we're all going to have to be keeping up with them on that. We're getting ours are just going out this morning. We're driving down to go talk with our group here in about an hour. So that's a bit of a stressful thing to try and get that deadline. And I know that, and in some ways, the literature review portion of what we're doing is a little bit of an opportunity to take a half a breath anyway to kind of try and become a bit more familiar with the area that we're going to be exploring in your projects. I mean, in some ways, you've kind of been faking it up to this point, right? I mean, you were not necessarily experts in this area, and you've kind of just been hustling and doing it, and there's a lot to that. You know, you get as much information as you can, and you present the information as clearly as you think it makes sense. And so now we've got about a month, roughly, for this kind of in-depth exploration to try and really get much more comfortable, to help focus and frame our conversations and our activities as we move forward. And so hopefully I'll give you some advice or some suggestions that will be useful in this phase of what we do. You've all done the reviews before. You've all grappled with some of these things. So I'm really hoping we can have a conversation as well about some of these issues, like when do we know that I'm going down a tangent or a rabbit hole that's not any good? How do I make a determination about, okay, this is something I need to explore further. This is indeed appropriate. Is this a good resource? Is this a poor resource? How do we get to the point when you find that gold every once in a while, right? There's that time when you're like, oh, this is the article I've been looking for. When did this? Why didn't I find that? And how can I find that earlier? I'd love to talk a little bit about information management, right? There's a lot of different ways to be able to manage this information. There's a lot of stuff coming in, and so we can talk a little bit about some of those ideas. Let's see. I haven't used this before. Okay. So clarify what it was that we're asking you to do. I think you all know this is indeed what you've seen, that language and what we expect. It comes down in a purpose here to ultimately getting to the point where we actually can guide our data collection activities. There is a separate 2 or 3 weeks where we do a data collection plan, which is a much more specific, but it's supposed to launch right from this kind of work that's done. There's a lot there. That's an ambitious task for you all. I see the look on a few faces as we begin to look around and we think about what that is and what those expectations are. And I thought I should just, okay, so this is what I'm going to do this morning. I wanted to review real quick where we are. We actually have a model, the faculty and all. We worked quite hard this summer to sort of come up with a framework, some of which I don't know if we fully shared it with you. You see a piece of it in the syllabus. Came up, HS was asking, don't we have a model for what we're doing here in reference to the capstone? And I said, yeah, it's there, it's in the syllabus, but I don't think we've clearly stated to you that there is this thing that exists, and it's drawn from a number of places. I gave reference to the McKinsey stuff. I don't remember if I've shared how much of that I've shared with you, but there is a model there that we're borrowing. We have our own sort of approach to what's done. We use the material from other groups that have done capstone kinds of things. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements to our model, right? And so we've just done this project definition piece, which was the first piece of what we did, where we identify who our clients are. We think a little bit about our skills and our capabilities as team members. We're grappling with these ideas and these concepts to try and put some boundaries around what we're doing. It's by no means, as much as you've worked on these issue trees and these diagrams and these descriptions, it's by no means a finalized document, but it's going to be one that you're going to come back to consistently. And hopefully there are a few elements on there that are going to be really robust. Those deliverable pieces on the back end, that diagram may have some pieces to it. Some of the language in the descriptions may or may not, totally work 6 months from now, or even 6 weeks from now. But that's okay as long as there's a relatively robust core to this scope of work. And in particular, we come back to some of those deliverable documents again and again and again. Why did we say we were going to give them? We know we have these concept areas of where we're going to try and get at. So the second piece here is an attempt to become much more of an expert in this field that you're kind of, so the lobbying group, I'm going to pick on a few because I'm familiar with them, right? So we've got our transfer issues with the Texas Association of Community Colleges, we've got literacy down in Houston. None of us were necessarily experts in any one of the specific projects that were handed to us. It's a typical sort of thing that's going to happen if somebody at your level is going to get stuff thrown on your desk that you're not necessarily an expert with, and you grapple with, how am I going to be able to become familiar enough with this? And that's kind of what the impetus of this little handout was. I just thought about the way I approach what I do when something like this happens, or even when I take on one of these capstones. I know you've seen this, but I went ahead and just printed a copy because I think it actually provides some fun language and an interesting framework. So give me a second to just get that in your hand. And it is available, of course, on the website.
Thank you.
Reactions to that? Thoughts? What do you think about? How are my suggestions? How about those how elements? And again, this was really, I looked at some stuff and just literally started drafting up some notes about my thoughts about how I might approach something like this. Where we've got these phases, we build, right? And so that's that. You've seen that funnel diagram 110,000 times, right, as you write and what that entails. And so this is really just phase one is the top of the funnel. Phase two, we're starting to narrow our way down. Whereas phase three, we get ourselves pointed enough to be able to ask some really substantive kinds of questions. Reactions, thoughts, parts of it that make sense, parts of it that resonate. One of the things that you found, right, I gave you a bunch of resources to look at. You've got the chapter in the textbook. You've got the lecture that the woman did over at the Writing Center. I know the textbook had other resources, and if you search literature reviews, my goodness, it was Dr. Morrison who provided that wonderful pile of stuff, wonderful set of materials for you to be able to review. I mean, just lots of diagrams, lots of stuff in there. There's lots of ways to approach this. We do have to personalize, and it ultimately does have to come our own. I kind of like the reference to in the lecture about they said, we said, I think is a reference what it was, but this idea that there's something that other people are saying about this concept. At some point you have to be able to say, what am I saying, or what is our group saying about this concept? And that's a difficult task to be able to get yourself there, and there's no clear path. There are a number of things that we can suggest to you that will improve that likelihood of getting there, but there is that inherent moment when you're like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? And how come I'm driving you crazy? I can't keep track of where it all is. Then there's those pieces when you begin to go, oh, I think I found something. I think I've got a logic to this. I think I've got something that I can communicate back. You've written numerous papers to be able to do it. So thoughts, reactions to this as a guide. Does that help? Does it miss? So I propose that phase one has potentially already taken place, and that you did that in order to be able to create your scope of work document. You've already done it. And then beginning to get into these more detailed elements of focusing your areas more extensively. Let's go through some of these pieces of this slide and see what reaction. So this is our model, right? So we will get to here by December. Right? And then you're going to create a report that actually slips in the middle here and says, here's where we're at. And it will have all of these elements built into them. And it clarifies where we're going to be able to go forward so that in the spring we can collect our data, do our analysis, and really have something interesting to say that adds quite a bit. Because at this point, the likelihood that you're going to say something to your client that they don't already know, maybe you'll find some literature, maybe you'll be able to scope something out in a way that they don't fully appreciate. But for a lot of us, really this is almost as much for us to get us up to speed about what's going on. Yeah, and again, thinking about your guy in the Congressional Research Service, it's going to take quite a bit to be able to pull something together to give him some information that he doesn't already know. He's an expert in this area, and a lot of your folks, you think about our folks at the community college, because the woman doing the literacy work, they've got a pretty good handle on a lot of this stuff. So a lot of our job is to make sure that we're not looking, excuse me, too stupid in some ways and saying things that are really kind of out of base. And so we try to get ourselves up to speed to be able to do that. So then that's our spring. So hopefully that helps place where we're doing and how this sort of fits into this overall approach. This is a model, and if anything in the Capstone, this is potentially the thing that you should take with you. And somehow you need to figure out how does this fit into projects that come onto my desk in the future. And that there's a model here that actually makes sense. What is it that you want me to do? Let me get an understanding of what we already know about this. What else information do I need to be able to approach this? How can I synthesize something and add some value to this conversation in a substantive kind of way that actually is helpful and useful? And you'll be, hopefully, I mean, those are really interesting jobs that allow you to be able to do that. That's what you're here to be able to learn how to do, and so we want to be able to have that. All right, so obviously this task of trying to get our hands around our scope, our frame, we've spent a little bit of energy to do this already. Those are real questions. I think how did you all get to a point of being able to put some sense of, I think we're about right in reference to our scope of work. Did this happen to you? When did it happen? Is it still happening? We're not quite sure we're about right. Any reactions to that? Was there a time, I'm thinking about, again, I'll pick on my groups because I've been thinking about our literacy group. We were sitting yesterday. And I don't want to give too much. What happened yesterday that worked for us? So I'm going to pick one ahead and call on Alicia or Kristen and sort of say, what happened yesterday? Did it feel like we were getting closer?
Yeah, definitely.
So what happened?
We had done more research.
Okay, so we read more stuff.
And we kind of had a better idea of the layout based on like the research that we had read as to how we should be getting the pieces to fit together. Because we had all the pieces, but they were all just kind of sitting on the table.
Right, we were working on that mutually exclusive, conceptually exhaustive. We had a lot of chunks of stuff sitting around. But as you said, the pieces weren't coming together. There was no logic necessary, or the logic was there, but it was so convoluted and so difficult to be able to explain what are we doing and how we informed the logic came from, oh yeah, well I just finished reading such and such and so, well I have a performance management class, so this is a scorecard element. So she finished reading through the textbook, she's reading ahead, and starting to realize, oh my gosh, we need this whole other thing. And it was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we need. I've been feeling it, sensing it, hearing it. We just didn't have language to be able to say, you need this. We've been calling it all kinds of different things. So we began to get language too. There's some consistency in language that happens. When you see some of that, or when new ideas keep popping in, it can be an element when you realize, okay, we haven't quite got ourselves sufficiently into this, that I'm seeing lots of new stuff, right? So that's another thing that happens in our scope of work. Have I felt like I've seen consistency in what people are saying about this, in the language that they use, and that at the very least I'm able to sort of use some of that language myself. What happened when you began to feel like you were getting close to framing this?
I think meeting with them for us, our client was here last week, and we were really able to kind of listen to them talk at length. And it's easier to have a conversation face to face. It's harder sometimes over the phone
Correct.
to really get the meaning behind some of this stuff. So I felt like that was.
So the client meeting was an opportunity for you that helped say, oh, wait a minute, I can listen to their logic about where these pieces are at, and that's beginning to make sense for me about being able to put some of these pieces together.
I think it's important to notice too that that is not always the outcome.
Correct.
When our group met with Dr. Strauss, talk about what happened.
I think we left a little bit more confused than we started.
Yeah.
A little frustrated because we thought we would be able to knock down or sort of set in line our deliverables and measurables and how we were going to measure success, and that became even more confused. So it sort of slowed the process.
You were asking for something that he wasn't really willing to give you.
Right.
Or hadn't thought about
Or
it.
hadn't thought about.
Or thought about it and said, well, we don't really measure Because I thought if we could match the way CRS evaluates its own success with Congress, and he said, well, I think we've got measures, but I really don't know anything about them. There you go. It's like, okay.
So a track that they were gonna go down turned out to not be the one that the client was gonna help them, be able to help them figure out. So they had to go back. What did you do since then to try and be able to, yeah?
We sort of just,
We told them what we think he ought to have.
that's sort of what
You went back and tried to clarify your argument
Yeah.
and your position? That is a reasonable response
We
sometimes.
decided what was gonna be a good deliverable for us, what was gonna make us feel good about the project, and that we had done a good job, and sort of.
So this sense of trying to own it is a real big piece of what this literature review process entails. So as you move forward, you should continue to feel like this sense of owning it, but also framing it and around the deliverables becomes a good way to be able to do that. Betty, what were you thinking?
Once we made the picture, I thought I was gonna be able to get a better idea, and it did, it gave me a better idea, but then you kept pushing, well, define this. So when I started going, I had to go to the literature to define it, and once I defined advising, then I realized there's like 14 functions of advising, and I was able to, but by having a clear definition of what they were, I could see what section of advising would fit for my project.
So you started to move down that path. The diagram was great, it set up a general framework, but then I began to push you to keep moving down and get more focused and more explanation. And we're with that, several of our pieces of our project, so we need better definition around what this is, better clarity around some of these pieces. But it did give us tremendous focus. We've got a pretty good set of topics in that project. And this is where, right, you have to just allow yourself the curiosity piece. You have to just allow yourself to be curious. And I know we all approach literature reviews in different kinds of ways, but there is a sort of a collection piece that happens, right? So we're going to talk about managing the information and managing the mess. I know one of the things that I'll do to procrastinate even at times is, let me just go find another article. Let me follow this track about who cited this article on Google Scholar. Oh my God, 400 people have cited this article.
I need to know this.
I need to know.
All the sources
I
that are
need
in
to
it.
go look and see what these things are, because I don't want to read the 10 that I just pulled, and I want to just sort of continue. That's an okay time, but this is right. This is what this is about, right? When do I know that I've gone too far? What are some of the things you all do to know that you've gone too far? Clicking on those things out there on Google. Google Scholar is a tremendously powerful tool. Wish I had it, right? So how do you, well, how many of you have gone down, I assume most of you have gone down those rabbit holes and clicking and finding and fun little pieces of, well, it can happen even on a general web search, and it certainly can happen in Google Scholar. Yeah.
I only go twice.
You only go twice. What, 2 layers?
Yeah, I only get to wander twice, and then I get this sense of, I gotta get back to where I was at.
Right, so I'll click twice. Yes.
In a more systematic way, you as a group sit down and determine what your bounds in your research are, and therefore when you get down one of those rabbit holes, you say, oh, I'm going too far.
I clearly have gone outside of this, and you got that internalized, that frames that are putting in that around what your project's going to be.
No, we're gonna sit down and do
You're
that.
working on it, right? So we continue to work on trying, and that's part of what the fun is, right? Is that some of this stuff is expandable, and how much should it expand? Or and it probably, in many instances, it should, right? Because there's always that reference. There's always that reference. There's no literature on this. Especially when you get out of the practice field, no literature on this very specific question that I'm asking about this X, Y, and Z. And that's probably true. In that particular context, in this particular setting, in 2014, there's no literature specifically on, but there are these things that inform this conversation. Jack?
When you start researching, you have to have what you're looking for in mind, and then continuously be thinking, okay, is this applicable? Does
Okay.
this apply?
So continue to ask that same question. Is this fitting in what I want to do? And I think some rules about, I mean, I do the same thing, click twice and then I got to go back, right? Open this thing up in a new window because I got to make sure I figure out where I came from, right? Because all of a sudden you're down 3 layers and you go, and I do the same thing with the number of pages I'll go in Google. I'll go a couple pages If I'm getting a lot of good stuff, I'm fine, I can go to the first couple. If I'm not getting it, sometimes I'll keep going, but I won't typically go too far away from what I think is a pretty, as long as the one that I'm looking at is pretty core, is pretty good, it seems to be pretty central to what I'm trying to do. The woman that, the lecture this weekend, or this week that I sent you, talks about using the big hitters in the field, core, really important elements, and that Google Scholar facilitates that by showing you how many people cite this work. So once you've got a sense of where the frame is, you can begin to narrow down and say, well, I probably should be reading, Betty did this the other day, and found all those folks that were doing academic advising, and there happened to be a couple of individuals that were just like owning the field. And so realized I need to read 5 or 6 of these pieces that these individuals have put together to be able to get the heavy hitters that are in this area in reference to what they're doing. I think it's important to look at multiple sources. I'm not opposed to, as you saw on the early end, especially on the front end, some early searches into websites, early searches into Wikipedia as a place to get my mind wrapped around. It's the first thing I did when I looked at these. But that was 2.5, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks ago, right? So I'm moved beyond that in reference to what I'm thinking about. So I'm not looking at the Wikipedia side about literacy or transfer rates now. I'm trying to get much farther down. But that can be a reasonable place to start, and there are wonderful sources that can link you to it. What are some of the things that you all do to decide that something is valuable or not valuable in reference to your search? We've talked about scope, but I'm thinking more like this is a useful resource. This is one I probably should make sure that I capture. What are the things that you might do? Yeah.
One of the things I do is on Google Scholar, they tell you how many times it's been cited, so you can kind of identify the key players in the field, and as well as through the A&M library, it tells you if it's peer-reviewed and scholarly as well.
Okay, so you use those cues that are saying, okay, I'm trying to get towards stuff that's at least got some peer review on it. It's something that's been cited by other people who know more than I have said that this individual has got some value in what they're trying to communicate and say. I think it's a really good tool.
I try to make sure I'm getting both points of view. So if I have a large group of authors that are all supportive of this one idea, I want the opposition. So
Is there somebody saying something different
If there's someone
about
saying
this?
something different, and if somebody's saying something different, I definitely want to capture that.
Now, where the Google Scholar sometimes falls apart is getting the new stuff, right? So how is it, because they're not going to be cited. So something published in 2013 or 2014 isn't going to be cited by a lot of individuals. But there is a place for that, obviously, right? So since you were talking about using those sources, what do you do to try to get more current material? How do you find that?
Well, Google Scholar does have a since 2014 or since 2013.
Filter some of that
I
stuff.
can do that, yeah.
It's a good tool. I don't use that one very much, but that's a good one to be able to do, indeed. Yeah.
Another thing is identify key authors, and then if they have recent publications, you can rest assured that they're.
Right. So so-and-so's been a publisher in this area, so then I search by the author. Other ways that you try to get newer stuff to bring it up to date.
You can go straight to the journals. If you see a lot of the good information and literature that you're seeing is coming from specific journals, go pull up their most recent journals.
Right. I mean, that's one I use quite often, right? So I get these table of contents things. You won't be getting those, probably not. Wouldn't get them in this area, but the alternative is you go to the most recent journal in this area and you start looking what's been done. And then you can also pick up in those, a lot of those indexes, they'll list who cited the article, right? And they typically will sort those by date. So some of the most recent ones that have cited a particular article that you liked, right? So you can find an article from '94 that's really central to some of the, asking some really interesting questions around the issues that you're concerned about. And then you can go into the source and be able to find, oh gosh, look at this. Somebody's still writing, somebody else is still using this, and here's a 2014 publication on this, and they've done other kinds of things. What are some of the other gold that you find that is useful for you? So we've talked, yeah.
Working papers, go to university sites where there are departments or groups doing work in the
Good
area
point.
and check out the working papers.
Those aren't going to be indexed a lot of times. Sometimes they'll be in Google Scholar, sometimes they won't, but they may be multiple
Or that
pages down.
SSRN thing.
That SSRN is a pretty good one.
And
That
it
whole
seems
lot.
like just about every single issue that each group is working on probably has like a national research center or some sort of a, place where they're trying to compile.
Right, so that's the key sort of websites, which is a recognition that there are actual organizational entities associated with this work, and that I should probably be familiar with who they are, and also some of the associations that might be there, and the research institutes that might be doing some of this work. So there's a lot of potential sources in a lot of ways, and that's why that scope document is really important, but also just thinking about quality, trying to avoid spending a lot of time on stuff that's not as quite rich of a quality. So then, I'm pretty sure what's next is, oh, right, so managing the mess, right? What are people using? Who's got systems that, you got a system that works?
We have folders and subfolders set up on the Google Drive.
And you're throwing articles in
And
there.
we try and group everything by topic and.
So you've decided on topics and subtopics based on your scope of work. So that scope of work, again, will come in very useful in being able to say, okay, this fits in, we've done that with our projects as well, we can easily find some stuff. You found something related to what the other topic is, you can throw it in there. Sometimes the classifications get clunky, right? Oh gosh, does this fit there, does it fit here? But having something to be able to throw it in, I think the Google, Betty, what were you gonna say?
Well, and I'm not sure this is my team. but
Okay,
you probably
so this
should.
is yours, yeah?
But every time I do research, I have an Excel spreadsheet where I add that in there and I say what the project was for.
And I think one of the, Jenny, one of the documents you put up, right, was an Excel spreadsheet that allows you to be able to summarize
Just,
some of
yeah,
that
as an
stuff.
exemplar. There's also
Right,
some
so an
really
Excel
good math.
spreadsheet can be a mechanism. Richard, do you have any luck with that EndNotes?
We've been playing with EndNote. It's pretty useful because you can link your articles right into your references, and you can also write summaries right there that you can pull up in Word when you're writing. So
It's a powerful one, there is a learning curve.
It's free too.
Is it free?
that's free through the
Through
library.
the
Software.tanner.edu.
They'll send you the link in an email.
Which is a great resource anyways, because you can download a ton of different software for free or for very cheap. Shameless plug, it's
Software.tnu.edu.
awesome.
It's bookmarked on my computer.
And EndNotes is really very powerful. I moved to that probably 4 or 5 years ago. Went from the folders and the stacks and the printing. I know you all are not probably printing as much as my generation did years ago. You can still go in. You can still go in and pull my file drawer cabinets and see the stacks of articles that we used to have. Right, we really did have the indexes and all that other kind of stuff. So RefWorks, I don't know, did anybody use, that's the one the library has?
We used it in undergrad. It's kind of clunky, but
Okay. So if you were to go between the two, you'd do EndNotes?
EndNotes is confusing, but it seems more useful.
And it creates the folders like you just said, and then you can multiple classify articles. It just,
There is an end of web, and team member can share each other the articles. You don't need to download it.
so you can do the web version.
Yeah.
I have not used the web version, but I know that it is there, and that's a good resource as well. And right, so part of your thing, and which is why the Google Docs is nice, because you can share it. You guys will have different versions of libraries created by each one of you, and then you've got this thing going on, right? Because then this collaborative piece of trying to get the information shared adds a whole layer, right? So even as you listen to that woman talk over at the Writing Center, she was primarily talking to particular individuals and their literature review work that they needed to be able to do. So we went ahead and made that more complicated for you and allow you to be able to work with others to be able to have fun in your literature review. So you've got to get there, you've got to try and bring others along. They're focusing in on some of their other stuff. And so that's really, and I know that I've had on and off conversations about these reading reviews, right, as a tool, and how honest the groups are being with those, how thorough are we being to that process. This is getting to some of the next steps. But that's a really pretty powerful thing if we can be honest and actually follow through on all the steps that it asks you to be able to do. Summarize the articles in these documents and the reading review documents, create a modest analysis paper that begins to synthesize some of the key ideas and points across themes. You've probably already figured out that if you pick the wrong 4 or 5 articles, you're really in trouble on the reading reviews, right? So that didn't take you too long when you started to realize, I'm supposed to synthesize these things to get, oh shoot, I should have been more thoughtful about which articles I'm looking at as I try to be able to write this up, because these things don't relate to each other. But now we're much more along in the process that your ability to choose 4 or 5 really good articles should be pretty easy, because you'll have looked at 10 or 15 potentially at this point, and those reading reviews are. Then the second piece of that is sharing them and getting your group members' attentions. They have trouble getting your faculty member, heaven forbid, attention to take a look at some of the stuff that you've written or that you've read, and being able to sort of be able to get that so that you could actually have a conversation with each other around some of these subject areas. And I know this is the next, we're skipping ahead here. This is some of the next steps. So to summarize, what did they say? We're all pretty good at this, right? And we hear the lament from faculty here all the time. Oh, the students, all they do is summarize. This article said this article said that, this article said this, and there's my review paper, right? So we really, obviously this needs to move beyond that. We have to do this first, so the reading reviews help us be able to do that. But then the hard part for me, I think this is relatively functional. I think most of you can do this probably without too much trouble, or at least you should be able to, or getting there. It's this piece, right? It's the owning it. What do we say about this? What do we know about this material? What have we synthesized and put together to try and be able to do it? And that's where these, so in 2 weeks your analysis papers are due, which is sort of this mid-semester touch point where you're really supposed to have been grappling with something pretty good, and if you've been more or less honest with your reading reviews, I kind of got a sense that maybe not everybody's been as both of my groups are struggling with trying to figure out how to be able to manage some of this. Some of getting the scope of work document done will free up, and that's where I started off this morning. I said, it's kind of a nice time. You've got about a month now to just kind of get into this stuff and really just read and reflect and be curious and share and talk and try and have conversations with each other about some of these things. I mean, every one of these projects is fascinating. I mean, they really are. And so your ability to be able to become more familiar with that and to have an interesting conversation about something that you found will move you down this path. Really, I mean, that's other thoughts about how to, we struggle with it within our own head, how to synthesize stuff. Yeah.
I had a quick question. You mentioned the issue paper building off of the reading reviews.
Right. Did I get the names right?
Well, in the syllabus, it was talking about that being based on management articles.
Did I get the?
So we just wanted to clarify what the issue paper is.
The issue paper is. You can't find the syllabus, because I should, before I say anything, I should probably.
It's the student picks the topic.
Right.
It should be relevant to the work that.
If it says management in there, it's just a holdover from previous content.
So it's to build on the stuff that we've been doing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You will tell. In fact, basically, you should tell us what that paper is going to be.
Yeah, because it said on a relevant management or measurement issue. That's why we were.
Okay, so it got pulled out of Dr. Kerr's performance management class.
It should be relevant.
It should be relevant
to the work you're doing.
And so, yes, it should be central to your scope of work document and absolutely be moving you forward to the culminating lit review piece. So you don't need to be somewhere else. This needs to be working toward the lit review. So it's 2 weeks from now. The lit review is due in like 4 weeks. Is that? Sounds like about right. It's the 31st.
We're gonna dress as Miss Frizzle. Not really.
Miss Frizzle.
That would be good.
Oh, yeah. Did you not know Miss Frizzle?
Magic school bus.
Sorry.
And or reading rainbow. You should go with reading rainbow.
I'll be the rainbow.
First grade, my daughter was Miss Frizzle, and she wore a jumper that had space things on it. You know where she ended up.
So cute.
So the other thing I do is I draw pictures, I make tables, summarize, and then create a table that integrates these concepts and ideas into something. Right? So we don't always think about making a table. So any of you have been lucky enough to sit through the management class with me, or if you're looking forward to it next spring, you'll see that that darn thing is just packed full of tables. Why? Because it summarizes information and integrates understanding from multiple individuals. So you think about the table associated with interorganizational relations. I mean, the darn thing is packed with them, but it was a tremendously powerful tool. The other thing that was in there, Pictures, lots of drawing, lots of pictures. I like pictures. I like to draw it. I like to see it, right? So between a table and a picture, I've synthesized a ton of information, and people can pull. I've had other folks say, I just used one of your tables. I don't worry about the rest of it. I just used one of your tables to have a conversation. I'll throw it up. We'll talk about what that is and what that means in reference to this management concept. So tables can be a tremendously powerful tool for you to be able to, we're looking for ways to be able to manipulate this information and bring it together. So we're talking about conversations, but also textually and visually you can begin to play around with some of these things and bring them together. Yeah.
I would just like to reiterate what Dr. Brown's saying, because often the hardest session that I have, and I've been doing this about 12 years with Capstone groups, but it's sitting down and being able to map that out collaboratively and being able to share it with your faculty advisor is where it gets really tricky. You think you're writing and each of you has your pieces, but if you can't create, and also like boxes and arrows, and somehow that these variables, these big topics somehow interrelate, usually the ones that you're struggling with the most probably are not relevant. So that's a hard exercise, but I really cannot overly
Right,
support
so
the
we've done
idea
it
of that.
at one level with these issue trees, but this is
Yeah.
even moving us farther
Yeah.
along and much farther down that logic of how these pieces.
Yeah.
And you're right, if something is really not fitting, especially when you go to try and talk about it,
Right.
then okay, then let's put it aside for a little while and put it somewhere else and hold on to it or think about it.
And often, but sometimes those little nagging things can also be very important, but it, so it can go either way. So don't just toss them out, but use that as an
Or
opportunity.
sometimes it's a missing piece. That
Right.
was really what happened with our project, was we were missing a piece. That's why it doesn't make sense. Here's that piece, oh thank God, because now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me as well, so Richard did an incredible job with our meeting map. With the meeting map kind of focused, each one of our attention into a specific area inside the project. I think if you've got a well-developed meeting map, I think it does clarify your focus.
Right, and then as you begin to get into these, and my concern with some of the, with projects can be, we don't share, right? So that they are interrelated with each other. And so at what point, yes, clearly the expertise development and framing it and synthesizing and allowing for individuals to drill down in a particular area of the MECE chart is important, but then we also need to make sure we're sharing with each other. Because it's not all, and that's what that logic is about. So finding opportunities, when are we making sure that you're given the opportunity to share a little bit about what you've done, right? So we worked hard on it, we thought about it a lot, we're actually becoming pretty familiar with it. You need to allow some time for you all to be able to do that, and the faculty member's not always going to be there for that. There's no way we're going to be able to always be participating in those. So it's up to you all to make sure that you're sharing with each other the stuff that you found. But it's up to you to pick the good stuff, right? You guys read this one, really. This will make a difference, and it'll help me explain what I want to try and be able to explain to you about what I found in this area. Right? And it's the gold, it's the stuff that kind of motivates us, it's what makes us excited about learning. That's what's really fun about this piece, but it's also hair-raising at times. I think. No, back to the assignment. Doesn't look any easier now than it did before, does it? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, a little bit? Oh, wonderful. Fun, anyway, perhaps. Next week, we're going to do our scope presentations. We didn't necessarily agree on length. What do we say, Dr. Kerr, 10 minutes?
With 5 minutes for questions.
10-minute, 5-minute questions. So get it down. It's a great opportunity for you to be able to explain the logic of what you're doing. And it's done in groups, so we're going to have Tackett Gibson's and my 2 groups will be in this room. And then Dr. Kerr's, Dr. Rosser's 2 groups, and Dr. Morrison's 1 group, right? So it'll be two groups of 4. Where are you guys going to be?
Well, I've got a small seminar room, so I'll check with Stephanie. We need a room. I saw that in the email.
Deborah, can they fit in yours? What's?
Yeah, the one that.
1041?
1041.
1041 is probably as good a spot as anywhere. It's about, how many people is that? Whatever, you'll fit. There's 20 seats in there. You'll fit. It's not.
Okay, so
1041?
write that down. I need to figure that out. 1041.
And And then, yeah.
What is this? I'll keep
I would do, yes. Because this is in the scope of work. So we'll do peer reviews, of course, but this is your target. That's what you should do in reference to what you should create. We're going for 4s all the way down.
Just to clarify, the, per roster Morrison, we go to 10.1 first thing.
Correct. Yep. You got it? PowerPoints is, yes, indeed, in order, because that'll frame your. You can keep it. It's in the assignment folder under scope of work. So there's that rubric that I just handed out that establishes which. So you'll all have that in front of you, and you'll be evaluating each other, of course, on that, with that rubric, plus the faculty advisor will be there. I think we did. I got to run down to Houston. I'm going to go see the Bushes.
Have a good time, Dr. Brown. Just kidding.
Thank you, everybody. It was
Wait too long.
Did you actually stop?
Yeah.